and here's this really high margin opportunity, if done well, that I can then use to create a more sustainable practice and career for those that work for me.
So, hey, Stephen, welcome to the show. How are you?
Doing wonderful. How are you?
I'm doing all right. I can't complain. So, I'm excited about talking with you about RTM or remote therapeutic monitoring, kind of the economic side of things, kind of the hybridized care and the future of healthcare in general. But before we dive into that, tell everybody a little bit about yourself, your background, and what brought you to what you're doing now at Sarah Health.
Absolutely. So I'm a frustrated patient. I've had amazing times in the clinic, right? If it wasn't for Larry, Hope, Greg, Tim, and some of the other fantastic clinicians I've been able to work with to rehab a torn labrum, an ACL meniscus repair, and a lot of wear and tear on the body from taking about 200 flights a year on my first job out of college. I wouldn't be able to move, be able to do the things I can right now without pain and without any sort of restriction. Being able to toss my son in the air, do squats with it, like whatever it is, right?
Yeah, all the things.
All the like being human, right? Being necessarily human. I I owe so much to those clinicians and what they were able to do. However, I just was so frustrated by the just black hole feeling in between visits and this lack of continuity. And me being a data nerd myself, there was frustration too with asking me about things that I didn't know I should be recording and logging, right? Like, how was your pain on Sunday? I don't know. If you told me, like, and I'd be super frustrated, right? Because it'd be almost like this I failed on the report card type of feeling. And so with that's what started the process of me getting thinking about how can we go and fix this and surrounded myself with others. So our found my CTO who's getting his master's in and master's in computer science at UCLA while I was getting my MBA, and our head of clinical, he did his fellowship and treated patients in the Mayo Clinic for about a decade in Rochester. And so we had the nice triangle, right, of business, tech, and clinical. However, in 2018, no one was really paying for patient engagement outside of some very niche areas that we found that were in these value-based contracts where that's all they cared about. Get our
Yeah.
people engaged both in the injury recovery process, and we got into injury prevention as well, which was great learning for how we think about that step down, right, as people get to the end of that recovery process. And then, as you know, and a lot of your listeners likely do too, right, the world changed on January 1st, 2022. And all of a sudden, what we did became incredibly important, especially with that 98977 code being 16 days of data exchange in a 30-day period.
Yeah.
All of a sudden, people were like, how much engagement are you getting? Oh, your patients are responding 7 out of every 10 days. That's now extremely important. And we've since seen a pretty meteoric rise over the last year and a half since the codes came out. And we were on the right side of time and place for when this seismic shift happened.
Yeah. Yeah. And you're talking about the remote therapeutic monitoring code. So, um, we've done a couple of shows on it in the past, but just a very brief, high-level overview. What is RTM and these codes that we're talking about here?
Oh, I'm sure you'll get three different answers, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Um, you know, as we looked at it, this is a patient engagement and relationship code,
Yes.
right? Like that's what it is incentivizing is how can you better interact with your patients between visits and how can you then figure out what a more optimal care plan looks like as a result, right? And so of course there's the four codes. We like to split them into two buckets. So we say the first two are the supply codes, right? Did you educate the patient
Yeah.
on the device that you're supplying to them? And then did that patient engage with the device that you're supplying to them? And then the second two are the time codes, which require 20 minutes, of each for 98980 and 98981, but 20 minutes of clinician time, whether that's data review or synchronous interaction, either way. But we like to split them up because as we tell anyone we have a demo with or talk to, even if you don't go with us, start with supply, right? There's so much change in that already. Start with supply, get those things moving and get that workflow, that comfort build, and then the time codes will happen. Like, it doesn't have to be, it sounds kind of like fluffy, like, oh, it'll just happen. It'll be ad hoc. Like, yeah. And if you're high Medicare, it'll probably be pickleball related. That's
Yeah.
what we've seen. I think 65 to 70% of our practices, their first time code was due to a response that was pickleball related.
Yeah.
And addressing it. Like, true life is funnier than fiction, right?
Exactly. Yeah. The
And that's,
convergence of pickleball and healthcare.
it's real. It's real. I saw an article the other day that said, pickleball was one of the greatest, MSK threats of our time. And I just laughed, like, did they just copy and paste CrossFit for pickleball? Like, in that,
Exactly. Yeah.
um,
Different demographic, same basic principle.
yeah, right. And like, okay, well, like, while I can understand that, right? I'm sure there's been an uptick and, just in general, there's some recency bias around it. I gotta think that many more people moving that weren't and caring about their movement health outweighs however many ankle sprains
Oh
and whatever
yeah.
happen. Right? That's probably a different conversation for
Yeah.
a longer, and one you should probably have with a clinical mind
Yeah.
and not me. But yeah,
But it highlights the point, which is there's because let's say people are moving more, whatever reason they're getting injured or they're moving more or whatever, there's now this pathway, right, of communication between clinicians and patients that wasn't there before, and it's opening up kind of the dialogue. So a patient maybe has an injury or tweaks something, or maybe they're in physical therapy for a shoulder pain or something, and now they go out on the weekend to do pickleball or whatever, and now they have new pain somewhere else, and they can reach out to the clinician. In years past, that was just something we always did, right? You had a message from Mr. Smith or Miss Sally Mae or whatever, and we were going to call them back and talk to them about their exercise or where their new pain was or whatever it was in between the therapy sessions. And now these codes kind of incentivize that more and then actually reimburse clinicians for doing that, right?
100%, right? This has been going on you've been doing this for decades, right? Clinicians have been doing this for decades. And now there's finally a reimbursement pathway there that incentivizes that, some more clinical time, right? And thought around those interactions, which makes so much sense. It makes so much sense. And I I hear some people call these codes a gift, and I couldn't disagree with that more. I don't think they're a gift at all. I think they're completely selfish by CMS, and I think the other commercial payers that are covering, which, as we've seen, is pretty darn
Yeah.
good, and they're unanimous, right? It's it's not because they're like, oh, we're really sorry we've been mean to you. That's not it. But I'd rather it be that way, because charities are hard to run, and businesses that have incentives that align are much, much
Yeah,
easier, right?
exactly.
So if you look at the two biggest the senior population, right? All these payers are getting to the MA, to the Medicare Advantage plans. You have CMS that obviously has all seniors, or for the most part, on Medicare. Their two biggest health risks are falls, directly related to movement health, and loneliness, which we would say is also pretty darn related, because if you can't leave your house comfortably,
Yeah.
then people come visit you, your chance of interaction goes down, right? That's not a huge logical leap. And we did some back of the envelope numbers and said, okay, if you assume that a Medicare patient will go into physical therapy and be on RTM for 3 months, and that has a cost, right? Let's just say it's what is that, 170, call it $200, right? For just the engagement code and the education. Well, if an average cost of a fall is 40 grand just for that event, not including what happens after, right?
Yeah.
As
And the
Medicare,
increased risk of mortality afterwards. Yeah. It's like you want to
I
avoid a fall.
being so conservative and just saying 40 grand, right? Like, that's highly conservative. Just say 40 grand. I only have to be right as Medicare 2 out of every 200 times that it decreases the risk of a fall, or at least the severity of an injury of a fall, to make money on this, like, man, those are good odds.
Yeah,
Those are great.
exactly. Yeah, which pulls us into that whole economics of it, because I think, when RTM came out I remember this back in 2022, and everybody was coming out of the woodwork like, you're going to add $30,000 a year or a month or a week or whatever it was to your bottom line by doing RTM. And maybe there are some organizations that are doing that and doing it effectively depending on their volume. My contention with it the whole time had always been, well, we do this for we'll talk about here in a minute, which is like the value-based and the hybridized care. But from an ROI standpoint to a clinic, does it make sense to consider RTM, and kind of how does it break down, and the revenue side of things for, let's say, maybe a small to mid-sized practice, maybe they've got a few locations, 60, 70% Medicare, whatever it is, and kind of walk us through how's the money flow from doing this? Because there's an upfront cost, right? You got to pay for access to some kind of portal or platform or device, and then obviously somebody to manage the tracking and all that, right?
So everyone has different business models.
Yep.
Ours is you pay for performance. So we only charge for patients we get to engage 16 times in a 30-day.
Okay.
So we have a little bit of a different model than most, where it aligns incentives. So, okay, did we give you copy and paste justification for you to bill? Yes. Okay, then we'll charge you for that. If you put a patient on and they don't engage for whatever reason, whether that's our fault or your fault or whoever's, you don't pay for that. It highly incentivizes us to figure out what went wrong. So that's our model. But you're 100% right on, just in general, there's like a social capital, or almost like leadership capital, that you have to expend in terms of saying, hey, we're going to do this, right? And you have to pick, okay, there's 8 things I want to do this year. Is RTM going to be one of them? And even taking away the numbers piece of it, there's a certain allotted amount of leadership capital units that you as a practice owner or practice leader has to choose what bucket that's going to go into. As we look at the ROI of it, and how it breaks down for a practice, I'll use Kinetic Physical Therapy as an example. They've got, I think, 5 or 6 clinicians, really high Medicare. I think they're like at the 80% range, maybe a little bit more than that. So for them, they're putting almost all their patients on Sarah, and they're getting a ton of them billable because it's part of the workflow now. It's just part of the culture of it. I think whereas you see a lot of success is in practices that really want to keep the one-on-one personalized care that they deliver. That seems to be our like sweet spot. Like, oh, you do one-on-one care today and you want to keep that, and your Medicare, or you feel good about your commercial population. If we see those 2 things, that's like, all right, this is probably going to work really well. Really excited. So you think that using Medicare, right, you're going to get roughly $75 that first month, and then $57 they're out. What we've seen is that typically can be average that out about $40, even if you're adding an incentive to your therapist, which we highly suggest, about $35-40 in net margin for an RTM month, right? And depending upon how good your margins are on your visits, let's say they're $10 of margin on your visits, well, then 1 RTM month is equal to 4 visits in terms of net margin. And so what we're seeing as practice owners are getting more and more used to this is like, you know what? Let's not do the 12 visits in 6 weeks. Let's do 6 visits in 3 weeks, and then start spacing weekly to be able to flex to the needs of if it's clinically appropriate and all of those things. And yes, we're saying we're going to say no to some top line in the short term, but yes to more margin in a not that much longer period. And so one of the incentive structures we've seen work really well is, or the incentive structure that seen work really well is anything directly related to that clinician. Things we've seen work poorly are like pooled bonus pools, or no incentive at all. we've seen those not work nearly as well. Actually, almost synonymous. Like you're
Yeah.
better off just doing no incentive than a pool of it, based on the performance that we've seen. And for that, we highly suggest a per billable patient, some sort of metric driven approach, and we've seen both like a straight unit, or a $10 per billable patient per month bonus. Both of those structures work quite well, and some practice owners are like, okay, well, if I'm going to add that, what has to happen to make that really make sense? And what we've seen is, if you can get a 20% bump, and not like 20% on 50%, but a 20% bump in patient adoption, you net that $10 per patient per month in terms of profit. So what does that mean? If instead of getting 30% of your patients billable, you get 50, then that bonus basically nets out at
Yeah.
that point, because you're making more margin. Like it all nets out. So as we're talking with practice owners that are wondering, like, oh, should I do an incentive structure or not? It's like, do you think that paying your people will move you from 50 to 70? Because if so, yes, like it's a mathematical, like it's the logical approach.
Yeah. Yeah. That's awesome. So, and this is all like in the same fee for service model that we find ourselves in. But you mentioned this earlier, like back in 2014, was it 2014 when you started?
2016.
2016. Back then, this stuff wasn't even billable. These codes weren't even a thing, and there was still value there because of what? It was the value-based reimbursement structure. So tell us a little bit about, okay, we got the fee for service, and that is compelling in and of itself, but really where we see a lot of payers moving towards is either kind of lump sum payments or shared savings or some sort of value-based reimbursement incentive or scheme, if you would. And something like RTM really opens the doors for those clinicians to maximize the value they bring to the table without falling into what most people do, which is like, well, we just got to book more visits, right? We got to bring them in more times or whatever it is. Like, this really allows some of that. So talk a little bit about the value-based application of something like RTM and kind of what you've seen as well, because I think that would be pretty interesting.
Yeah, we're doing some research on this, and we won't do, at least for this piece, we won't publish a white paper, so I can talk about it.
Yeah.
That's how research works. So what we've seen with, granted, small n to
Yeah.
start, but that patients are their outcomes, like especially we're using photo, right, for this. They may still be going to patients, whether Sarah, non-Sarah, may still be going from 50 to 80, but typically they're doing it in fewer visits. And so, like, okay, that's really interesting, right? So they're doing it in fewer visits. Maybe we'll see a total outcomes bump as we get further into it. But even just that, it's like, okay, if I can get a patient on Sarah or RTM, right, better in 8 visits versus 13, then RTM is all that's really doing is supercharging my EQ and IQ that I already have, and that clinical expertise I already have. And so I 100% see a future where you'll, and our opinion on it is, it'll be due to basically the engagement of the patient is going to be the key critical factor. Is you'll be able to know within that first visit, and maybe there'll be some pre-work, right, of, hey, tell us about your exercise habits and some other things, knowing those data points coming into it, that you'll be able to say, all right, United, per photo or per whatever outcomes measures we're using, this would typically take 12 visits to get to the appropriate score. We can do it in less, but we don't just want to give you all that and just say that, right? So instead of paying us 1,300 for this case, which you typically would have, give us 1,150 out of the gate, and then it's going to cost us. We're only going to need 8 visits plus some RTM, and our total cost is, total margin is going to be about 10 to 20% greater on that. And I think that's just the start, right?
Yeah.
There's so much you can do. And maybe to bring it up one level, and I think you're hitting at this, right, is looking at RTM as okay, this is just like something I can make money on right now, is going to be short-sighted, maybe successful for the next 3 to 5 years, but short-sighted in that we believe it is the proverbial carrot before the stick, right? Value-based care is coming. Here's a carrot. Let's see when we give some incentives and let the free market do its thing. Let's see what happens, and then use those results to inform
Yeah, exactly.
RTM2. Like, right? What does RTM2 look like? Is the new, I think it's CMMI for more of the primary care, right? Is some of that based off some of the results from RPM? I don't know the answer to that. I'm not inside CMS, but it wouldn't surprise me too much,
Yeah.
right? What does RTM squared look like for the rehab world? I think you need to be thinking about that and sort of say, okay, let's test this, let's use it, let's get reps in, let's figure out what we're really good at, and see how we can continue to lead. So when whatever RTM2 is comes out, we're ready.
Yeah. No, I think that's entirely correct. I mean, the reality is like it takes CMS, you know, 5 to 7 years to gather data before they're like, and this is the change we're going to implement, and this is part of it for sure. They're obviously incentivizing clinicians with some of this money up front, but they're gathering the data on this, and they're going to have their number crunchers doing what number crunchers do.
I, I, I had a hot take from an owner that I think you'll appreciate. In his mind, RTM is going to kill MIPS.
Oh
Like,
yeah.
this is it. Maybe not that hot of a take. I thought it was kind of hot when he told me. But yeah, our team is going to kill MIPS. That is his view on it, and that is how he is structuring his practice moving forward. Is okay. I can like this is how I deliver better quality. Like this, I will be able to flex to the needs of my patients so much better with RTM versus in the incentive structure inherent within it than the MIP structure.
Yeah. Well, and the reality is like that hybridized care, you know, if you're stuck in this fee for service mindset, like on the outside, you're like, well, why would I do anything if it's going to mean less visits? But if you're looking at it from like an outcomes based reimbursement plan, like decreasing visits is not a bad thing. Sometimes it's actually a very good thing because it means you're able to have more access in the clinic space for maybe for people that are on the wait list or people that need to come in, and then you're still delivering. Hopefully, you know, the data should hopefully bear this out, but you're delivering outcomes that are equal to what would happen if they were coming in twice a week for 12 weeks or whatever it is. You're decreasing the quote unquote cost to deliver care for that individual, but the outcomes are remaining the same, and you're able to service more individuals. It's just seems like a win-win all the way around.
Agreed, and that's where uh, you have to look at the margin contribution and not just your top line, right?
Yeah,
If you look at just your top line, you're missing the forest for the trees, right? And you got to be looking at that margin contribution because you may say, oh, well, on average, our total visit or our total episodes have gone from 1,300 to 1,200. Like this is bad. Well, yeah, but if your margin has gone from 2 to 300 in that same episode, that's fantastic, right?
yeah,
That's a 50% jump is life changing. Now, then what can you do? Well, you could start to be able to better compensate your therapist, which is not something we necessarily saw as an outcome for our Sarah customers and partners, but now seeing it firsthand of like, hey, I'm going to make an extra 10 to 15% this year because of RTM and Sarah, and I'm going to put that towards my student loans. What does that mean?
yeah,
Well, that means that based on $200,000 in student loan debt, that you're probably out 5 to 5.5 years quicker. That okay? Well now we have this whole other like thing of well, now can we start attacking the supply problem for PTs and OTs and SLPs as well, right? Because the demand isn't going away; it's only going to get bigger. And the I don't see the cost of education going down anytime soon.
yeah,
So you have to pull the levers that you have available to you, and so RTM to me seems like, okay, here's this really high margin opportunity, if done well, that I can then use to create a more sustainable practice and career for those that work for me. It's almost it's almost irresponsible. One panelist we had at the Ohio Physical Therapy Association state conference, like, it's almost unethical to ask your clinicians to do the RTM things and then not get paid for it because you don't want to either invest in some software or like whatever it is. Like that, hey, we love when you talk with your patients outside of their visits. Great. Do you have a like? Is there a system set up to be able to be paid for that? Yes, there
Yeah.
is. Awesome. Are we doing that? No. Huh?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Well, and from a like a even from an employee retention and like just a competition, like how many small private practices are struggling to keep a clinician because, they need some kind of benefit for either student loan repayment, like you mentioned, or something like that. And they go to a bigger guy, one of these big conglomerates or like a big healthcare system or hospital system. Um, and if they just implemented something like this, they could keep that team member, keep them happy, deliver the care they wanted to deliver. And then the clinician themselves is benefiting as well. They're getting paid for performance, it seems like a no-brainer.
And not just hours in, right? That's super exciting to us as well, is we're just seeing these examples after examples of where these clinicians that everyone knew were really good. Like, yeah, we know they're really good. They have great outcomes, and they seem to connect with their patients really well, and that now there's actually a way for that to contribute to their compensation, right? Like, hey, you're really good at connecting with your patients, which means you're going to crush RTM, right?
Yeah.
You get like 80 to 90% of your patients over that billable threshold for months on, for their entire plan of care. And you're going to be able to get the units or that bonus from that. And you're going to get paid for more than just your time in the clinic, which finally, right? Like it's yeah, it's something we get really, really excited about when we see those stories.
Yeah, that's awesome. All right. Well, Stephen, thanks so much for taking the time. I'm sure people are going to have questions. But first, before we do that, I always ask if there's one or two main takeaways that you would want maybe a practice owner that's considering RTM or clinician that's exploring RTM to walk away with from the episode. What would they be?
It's a good question. I wish I'd prepped for that one a little bit, but I do also appreciate it being on the spot. I think for the practice owner and clinician, I think it's probably the same, right? Is there are a lot of RTM options out there, and find the one that fits your practice, right? Like, don't just, oh, there's only Sarah. No, there's plenty, right? And it may look, and there's also like different sub buckets of us in there, right? You have us, which be our text message first approach that doesn't require an app download. It's very simple and lightweight, but may not work in your scenario if if you want to have something that has exercises and you get great patient participation on that. Like, we may not be a good fit for you. That's fine, right? So then you can look at the home exercise program, vertical, if you will, within RTM. And there's plenty of opportunities within there if that's that's your jam. And then beyond that, there's even others that get into more the device side of RTM. So I would say don't just assume that there's not a solution out there for
Yeah.
me. Come at it with more of an abundance mindset. And like, there's something out there almost assuredly that'll work for my practice and it'll work for my clinicians and how we like to deliver care. And let's go see if we can make something work. That, yeah, I think that'd be one. And then when you get there and you're like, okay, we're going to try something, could not, could not like stress this enough. Focus on 98975 and 98977, that supply bucket. Do it during your beta testing, during your pilots, everything. Like, make sure it actually like fits into your workflow and the way you deliver care.
Yeah.
And then measure based on those and not the time codes. And if you have a vendor that's saying, oh, we're going to get you $200 per patient per month in reimbursement, take that with, be a little, yeah, take be a little skittish about that, because that is in essence assuming that you're going to dedicate an extra hour per patient per month
Yeah.
to that, which we don't do that for that reason. We don't throw the number out ever for that reason.
Awesome. Well, where can people find out more about you, about Sarah Health, all the places? I guess I'm sure there's places to book calls with your team, or to learn more about how y'all work. Where can people do that?
Absolutely. So on sarahealth.io, so SARA health.io. If you go to our, I think it's called the pricing or metrics page, that link, you can actually do an ROI calculator for yourself. Like, okay, I have this many clinicians. Here's my rough Medicare split, like average evals per month. And you'll be able to see, okay, what could RTM mean to my practice? And you could do that all by yourself and be able to see, about what you think it could mean. From there, you can book a call with us. My direct email is Steven, so STEVEN at srahealth.com. So there's no first day, just srahealth.com. That's another, maybe for it's a fun one. When we started the company, there was a group parked on sarahealth.com and they wanted 400 grand for it. And I was just like, no way. I absolutely not. Since then, I guess website real estate has done the exact opposite, at least for that site,
Yeah,
housing real estate. And they let it go for a lot cheaper than that. But our email is still the srahealth.com.
cool deal. Awesome. Well, Steve, thanks so much, man.
Rafi, thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
All right.